Agent Robert Sullivan stood outside the Apollo Theater at 2:47 a.m., his federal badge heavy in his pocket, his pride shattered on the sidewalk. For 10 years, he'd hunted this man. For 10 years, he'd built cases, run surveillance, tried every legal trick in the book to bring down Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. And now, with his 8-year-old son missing for 18 hours, Agent Sullivan was about to do something that would destroy his career and save his life. He was about to beg his enemy for help. The irony wasn't lost on him. Robert Sullivan, the FBI's top organized crime specialist in New York, the man who knew every move Bumpy made, every associate he had, every business he ran, was standing in the heart of Harlem at 3 in the morning. Because the one man who could find his son was the same man he'd spent a decade trying to put in prison. Tommy Sullivan, 8 years old, had vanished from Central Park at 4:30 p.m. yesterday. 1 minute he was playing on the swings while his mother watched from a bench. The next minute, he was gone, vanished like smoke. No witnesses, no demands, no trace. The NYPD had mobilized everything: helicopters, K-9 units, hundreds of officers canvassing every inch of Manhattan. The FBI had brought in their best profilers, their missing persons experts, their behavioral analysis unit. They'd questioned everyone, checked every database, followed every lead. Nothing. But Sullivan knew something the other agents didn't know. Tommy hadn't disappeared from Central Park. He'd disappeared into Harlem, and in Harlem, there was only one man who saw everything, knew everyone, controlled every street corner and back alley: Bumpy Johnson. The hunt had started in 1949. Robert Sullivan was fresh out of Quantico, assigned to the FBI's New York Organized Crime Task Force. His first case file was thick, detailed, and completely focused on one target: Ellsworth Johnson, aka Bumpy, the undisputed king of Harlem's underworld. For 10 years, Sullivan had studied Bumpy like a scientist studying a rare species. He knew Bumpy's routine, his associates, his businesses, legitimate and illegitimate. He knew Bumpy ate breakfast at Small's Paradise every Tuesday, got his hair cut at Johnson's barbershop every Friday, attended services at Abyssinian Baptist Church most Sundays. Sullivan had arrested Bumpy 6 times. 6 times Bumpy had walked free, either on technicalities or because witnesses suddenly developed amnesia. The closest Sullivan had come to a conviction was 1957, a conspiracy charge that fell apart when the key witness disappeared the night before trial, not killed. Disappeared, relocated with a new identity and enough money to start over somewhere far from New York. That was Bumpy's style. He didn't eliminate problems, he solved them creatively. Over the years, their relationship had developed into something strange, almost respectful. They were professionals on opposite sides of the law, but they understood each other. Bumpy never resisted arrest, never caused scenes, always treated Sullivan with courtesy. Sullivan never planted evidence, never used dirty tactics, never tried to frame Bumpy for crimes. He didn't commit. It was a game, deadly serious but played by rules both men understood. Until yesterday, when the game stopped mattering, Sullivan's wife had called him at 6:15 p.m. Hysterical. Tommy was gone. She'd turned away for 30 seconds to buy him an ice cream. And when she looked back, the swing was empty. The vendor remembered seeing a boy matching Tommy's description talking to a well-dressed black man near the park entrance around 4:30. The description fit half the men in Harlem, but Sullivan's blood had gone cold. Someone had taken his son, and that someone had headed north toward 110th Street, toward Bumpy's territory. By midnight, Sullivan was desperate. By 2 a.m., he was broken, and by 2:47 a.m., he was standing outside the Apollo Theater, waiting for a man he'd spent 10 years trying to destroy. The theater was closed, but Sullivan knew Bumpy was inside. He was always inside the Apollo on Friday nights, running his weekly business meetings in the office above the main stage. Sullivan had photographed those meetings dozens of times, recorded conversations when he could, built a surveillance profile that would have made the KGB proud. No, he was going to use all that knowledge for one purpose: to find his son. Sullivan walked around to the stage door and knocked. 3 sharp raps, a pause, 2 more. It was Bumpy's code. Something Sullivan had observed and memorized years ago. The door opened. Willie Fish's Jackson, one of Bumpy's lieutenants, stared at the white FBI agent standing in the alley. "Agent Sullivan," Fish said calmly. "You lost?" "I need to see Bumpy," Sullivan said. His voice was hoarse, strained. "It is personal." Fish studied him for a long moment. Sullivan looked like hell. Wrinkled clothes, unshaven face, eyes red with exhaustion and desperation. "Wait here," Fish said, and closed the door. 5 minutes later, the door opened again. Fish gestured Sullivan inside, led him through the darkened theater, up a narrow staircase to the office above the stage. Bumpy Johnson sat behind a mahogany desk, wearing an impeccable navy blue suit despite the late hour. He was reviewing papers, probably policy bank receipts or numbers game reports. He looked up as Sullivan entered, showed no surprise at seeing his long-time adversary. "Agent Sullivan," Bumpy said quietly. 10 years you've been chasing me. Now you come to my place in the middle of the night. Must be important." Sullivan stood in the doorway, hat in his hands, pride crumbling around his feet. "My son is missing," he said. Bumpy set down his papers, leaned back in his chair. "How old, ain't Tommy?" "He disappeared yesterday afternoon in Central Park." "Police find anything?" "Nothing. No witnesses, no leads, no trace. It is like he just vanished." Bumpy was quiet for a moment. "And you think I had something to do with it?" "No," Sullivan said quickly. "No, I know you didn't. You don't hurt children. That is not your way." It was true. In 10 years of surveillance, Sullivan had never known Bumpy to harm a child or allow anyone in his organization to do so. Bumpy had his own code, and protecting kids was part of it. "Then why you here?" Sullivan took a deep breath. "Because someone took my boy into Harlem. And in Harlem, you see everything. You know everything. If Tommy's there, you can find him. And what makes you think I'd help the man who has been trying to put me in prison for 10 years? Sullivan met Bumpy's eyes. "Because you are a father, too." Bumpy had a daughter, Elise, from his first marriage. Sullivan knew about her, had seen her in surveillance photos, watched Bumpy's face light up when she visited. Fatherhood was the one thing that made Bumpy vulnerable, the one weakness in his otherwise impenetrable armor. "What you willing to give me in exchange?" Bumpy asked. Sullivan had been prepared for this question. "Anything. Name your price." "Anything's a dangerous word, Agent Sullivan. You sure you want to make that promise?" "My son is 8 years old. He is scared. He is probably crying for his mother. And he is somewhere in this city with people who took him for reasons I don't understand. So yes, anything." Bumpy stood up, walked to the window overlooking 125th Street below. Harlem was quieter than during the day, but still alive. "I find your boy," Bumpy said slowly. "You stop hunting me. No more surveillance, no more cases, no more trying to build charges that won't stick anyway. We call it even." Sullivan felt a weight lift from his chest. "Done. I am not finished," Bumpy continued. "You don't just stop hunting me, you protect me. When other agents come asking questions, you give them wrong information. When prosecutors want help building cases, you tell them you got nothing. When Washington wants to know about my operations, you develop sudden amnesia." The weight came crashing back down. What Bumpy was asking for was career suicide. If Sullivan got caught helping a known criminal, he'd lose his job, his pension, possibly face criminal charges himself. But Tommy was 8 years old. "I understand," Sullivan said. Bumpy turned from the window. "No, you don't. Not yet, because I haven't told you the last part." Sullivan waited. "When I find your boy, and I will find him, you are going to owe me, not just for this favor, but for every year you spent harassing me and my people. Every raid, every arrest, every time you made my life difficult. That is 10 years of debt, Agent Sullivan, and someday I am going to collect." The room was silent except for the distant sound of traffic on 125th Street. Sullivan understood what Bumpy was offering. His son's life in exchange for his own soul. His career, his integrity, his loyalty to the law he'd sworn to uphold. "Do we have a deal?" Bumpy asked. Sullivan looked at his hands, at the wedding ring that matched the one on his wife's finger, at the watch Tommy had given him for Father's Day with "World's Best Dad" engraved on the back. "Yes," he said, "we have a deal." Bumpy smiled for the first time. "Good, now tell me everything about yesterday. Every detail, no matter how small." For the next hour, Sullivan told Bumpy everything. The timeline, the witnesses, the vendor's description, the search efforts, the dead ends. Bumpy listened without interrupting, occasionally asking for clarification. When Sullivan finished, Bumpy picked up his phone and made 3 calls. Each conversation was brief, conducted in a mixture of English and coded phrases Sullivan couldn't decipher. When Bumpy hung up from the 3rd call, he looked at his watch. "Your son is in a basement on 142nd and Lenox," he said. "2 men took him yesterday. They're not from Harlem, probably from Brooklyn. They took him because someone paid them to pressure you into dropping a case. They haven't hurt him, but they're getting nervous." Sullivan's legs almost gave out. "Is he?" "He is alive, scared. But alive, we need to move fast." They left the Apollo Theater together, Bumpy driving his personal car, a black Cadillac that Sullivan had seen dozens of times in surveillance photos. As they drove through Harlem's empty streets, Bumpy made more calls, coordinating with his people. "How did you find him so fast?" Sullivan asked. "2 white men grabbed a white kid in Harlem yesterday," Bumpy said. "My people noticed. They followed them home, been watching the building since last night. I just never connected it to you until now." They parked outside a run-down apartment building on 142nd Street. 2 of Bumpy's men were waiting in the shadows, Willie Fish and a younger man Sullivan didn't recognize. "Tommy's on the 2nd floor, apartment 2B, Fish reported. 2 men, both armed, both jumpy." Bumpy turned to Sullivan. "This is your call, Agent. You want me to handle this my way, or you want to call in the cavalry?" Sullivan thought about it for 10 seconds. The FBI way meant warrants, backup, negotiations, protocol. It also meant Tommy could be hurt or killed in a botched rescue attempt. Bumpy's way meant bending every rule in the book, but it also meant getting his son back alive. "Your way," Sullivan said. Bumpy nodded to his men. They disappeared into the building through the fire escape, while Bumpy and Sullivan went through the front door. The lock picked easily. The stairs creaked under their feet. The hallway smelled of poverty and desperation. At apartment 2B, Bumpy motioned for Sullivan to stay back. He knocked on the door. "Yeah?" came a nervous voice from inside. "Police," Bumpy said, disguising his voice. "We got reports of noise complaints." The door opened a crack, revealing a thin white man with nervous eyes. When he saw Bumpy, his face went white. "Oh, shit." Bumpy pushed the door open, walked inside like he owned the place. Sullivan followed, his federal training taking over despite the circumstances. Tommy was sitting on a mattress in the corner, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Tears dried on his cheeks. When he saw his father, he started crying again. "Daddy." 2 minutes later, it was over. The kidnappers were zip, tied on the floor. Tommy was in his father's arms, and Bumpy was quietly giving orders to his men about cleanup and disposal. "They work for Mickey Torino," Fish reported to Bumpy. "Brooklyn family. Torino's got a nephew facing federal conspiracy charges." He thought grabbing the kid would make Agent Sullivan drop the case. Bumpy looked at Sullivan. "You know this Torino?" Sullivan nodded. "Michael Torino Jr. arrested 3 weeks ago for running book operations in Queens. The case is solid." "Not anymore," Bumpy said. "You are going to develop problems with your evidence, chain of custody issues, maybe lost paperwork. Torino Jr. walks, and his uncle never bothers you again." Sullivan understood. Another piece of his integrity, another compromise, but Tommy was alive, unharmed, back in his arms. "Daddy, I was so scared," Tommy whispered. "I know, son, but you are safe now. You are safe." They drove back through Harlem in silence. Tommy fell asleep in the backseat, exhausted by 18 hours of fear and confusion. Sullivan sat in the passenger seat, watching the streets where he'd spent 10 years hunting the man who'd just saved his son's life. "Why?" Sullivan asked as they pulled up outside his apartment building on the Upper West Side. "Why what? Why did you help me, really?" Bumpy was quiet for a moment. "Because 20 years ago, my daughter was 8 years old. And if someone had taken her, I'd have wanted every parent in the world to help me find her. Even you." Sullivan got out of the car, lifting his sleeping son. As he reached the sidewalk, Bumpy rolled down his window. "Agent Sullivan?" "Yes, welcome to the other side." The Cadillac drove away into the pre-dawn darkness, carrying the man who owned Harlem and now owned a piece of Robert Sullivan's soul. The Michael Torino Jr. case collapsed 6 weeks later due to procedural irregularities in the evidence chain. Agent Sullivan's report blamed clerical errors and recommended closing the investigation for the next 9 years, until Bumpy Johnson's death in 1968. Agent Robert Sullivan provided the FBI with consistently poor intelligence about Harlem's underworld. His reports were always incomplete. His surveillance always seemed to miss the important meetings. His cases always developed problems at crucial moments. His colleagues thought he was getting sloppy in middle age. His superiors thought he was losing his edge. Only Sullivan knew the truth. He wasn't hunting Bumpy Johnson anymore. He was protecting him, because some debts can never be fully repaid.